Hello, and welcome to The Giants Next Door, where we speak with the leaders shaping Australia's future through deeper engagement with Asia. Here we talk with some of the country's key business figures about their relationship with Asia and hearing their insights and reflections on what it takes to lead, build and succeed in the region. My guest today is Christine Holgate, Group CEO of Team Global Express. Christine's career has spanned leadership roles in some of Australia's most recognised companies, guiding them through complex international markets and forging relationships with global counterparts. Since her early days in the UK, Christine has consistently championed women in leadership wherever her career has taken her. Today she shares her insights on what we can learn from our regional neighbours to enhance diversity, foster inclusion and build long-term economic partnerships. Christine, welcome to The Giants Next Door.
Thank you.
Excellent. Christine, I do want to start with your early years. You grew up surrounded by family entrepreneurship, your own early business ventures, and you've gone on to have a very extensive international career. Were there any lessons learned about leadership from those formative years that still stand with you as a distinguished CEO today?
I think a couple of different things. One is, when you set up your own business or you're in a family of lots of small businesses, it's pretty much all hands on deck. And you really, if someone doesn't turn up that day, that's a quarter of your workforce. So you really learn to appreciate the people who work with you. And I think I really have. I had a difficult time in my life actually when I was 18 for quite some years. And I think that period of time really, when I was setting up my own businesses, really helped me understand what it was like not to have money and the importance of work and the importance of financial security. And that has definitely influenced me as a leader about the responsibility of looking after people who work for you and paying respect. I think if I might, can I share with you a little personal thing? So when I was 11, and I was one of 5 children my mum and dad fostered, so there could be any number of us at home. But when I was 11, my dad bought steaks in a Chinese restaurant in Liverpool. And we come from this little tiny village. There was no foreign food whatsoever. And I just remember going with him and my family on a Sunday night. And all week my mum used to make us learn to eat English food with chopsticks so we didn't show her up on a Sunday night in this Chinese restaurant. And just that whole celebration of food and how they run a course of a meal and it's a circle table and everybody's equal. I just fell in love with Asia as a little girl watching all of that. And that has definitely influenced my adulthood.
That's amazing. And it's amazing that story sticks with you till today. Here you are sharing it with us. And did that spur more interest in Asia even back then, or was it sometimes later before you actually travelled and your professional life led you into the region?
Well, when I was in my relatively early 20s, I went to Hong Kong and Beijing and Guangzhou. And that was actually the first time I'd ever left Europe. And it was still this love of this Chinese restaurant in Liverpool what spurred me on to go and want to find out about this region the first time I ever left Europe. And I just loved it. I loved Hong Kong. And I came back and I got myself a job at Cable & Wireless, which was a big international company with offices in Hong Kong. And I got myself seconded there a few times and then came back to London and in the evenings started to learn Chinese at SOA, School of Oriental African Studies, part of University of Central London. And that wasn't because I would ever dare speak it to you now, but I wanted to understand the culture, what motivated the people, what drove the people. Because if you don't understand culture, you don't really understand the language.
That's really interesting. And so what were some of those early insights or impressions that you have?
Well, the word shay has 26 different meanings. So and it can mean yes and no. So you have to be really careful. And, in English culture, when someone goes, nods their head, that means no. But of course it doesn't in Chinese culture. So And again, you know, they're very family-orientated people and very respectful, and it's different, but I loved it.
Did you see that then as you made your journey professionally? Did you sort of observe those different cultures, values, behaviours as you interacted with different groups of people, different teams, different individuals? Did you have a heightened level of awareness where there were differences?
I think I definitely did. And look, there was one time when I was made marketing director of Hong Kong Telecom, and I was in London, and going off to take this role. And I really wanted to be able to do my hello speech to the employees in Chinese. But of course, I was learning Mandarin, and they speak Cantonese, and they just laughed all the way through. But I think they gave me probably 3 out of 10 for effort. But they respected the fact that I tried to do it.
Yes.
And I think that whole respect and paying respect and not embarrassing people, not humiliating people, it's a very big part of the Asian culture. They say it's saving face. And that there's some really beautiful things behind that. So no, I'm a big lover of not just China, but I'm a huge lover of the region.
Amazing. We'll get into that a little bit more in our conversation. I'd love to talk about your extensive experience leading large Australian organisations, and I might start with Blackmores, Australia Post. You've navigated complex international markets, and I said in my intro, collaborated with global counterparts in those roles. What key lessons did you learn in those roles, working across different cultures and different markets in Asia?
Well, before, Blackmores was a wonderful company and 9 of the best years of my career. And I just absolutely loved working with Marcus Blackmore. But before I took the job up, I had the opportunity to go to the Beijing Olympics. And I'd asked Peter Osborne, who was working at Austrade, and Tim Harcourt, who was working at Austrade, to help me choose who the winners should be from a competition to come with me. And then I persuaded Peter to come on the trip with me.
Right.
And what I could see was he understood this culture thing. And so as soon as I got the keys, had my hand on the wheel at Blackmores, I said, you've got to give up your beautiful job and you've got to come and work with me. So when I worked in Hong Kong earlier, I got sick once. And the lady who worked with me at the time, she didn't take me to a normal doctor. She took me to a herbalist. And here I was running this natural health company where at the time, which is only not that long ago, 17 years ago, there was still a big pushback on natural health. And yet in Hong Kong, there was no pushback. It's the first place you went to. So I could just see that as a company, we already had the greatest market share. How were we going to grow? We needed to expand. And here was this amazing market just up the road who loves natural health. I didn't have to go in and argue the benefits. I had to argue why me and not somebody else, but not the benefits of doing it. And so I stole Peter and we started our journey. And we had some amazing lessons in that journey. And one of them because we're doing this video today in a university, that was a few weeks before Christmas. I think it was 2013 or something. And this gentleman from Korea came to see me, and he was from a television shopping channel. And he came in and he basically interrogated me about the efficacy of our products and manufacturing process. But we were at our campus and we could show him everything and the research we'd done. And then he said to me, could you be ready with 56,000 jars of fish oil for some date just before Christmas? Well, actually, that is a lot of fish oil. And that's a long process to do that. And I said, of course we can.
Right.
And he said, he hardly spoke any English, and said, great, we'll send the contract to you. So the contract comes, it's all in Korean. Now, there was no one in the company who spoke Korean. So I went to Sydney University and just put on the notice board, looking for a law student who speaks Korean. this great guy, Scott Choi, called me. I said, come on over today. And he ended up working part-time with us, and he worked with me and Peter on the launch. And then after he graduated, we gave him a job, and he played an integral part, actually, in our growth in Asia. Because here was this student who spoke the language, was studying law, understood the culture, and we didn't have those skills. And so it was just this great moment. And if anyone listens to this, I would really encourage them, if they're thinking about going into Asia. It is different to Australia, but it's exciting. But we have this amazing diaspora, and particularly in the universities. So get on down there and get yourself a Scott Choi.
That's amazing. There's a lot in that story that's emblematic of the opportunities and the strengths. And you talked about diaspora international students. And threaded through that story that you've shared with us, if I could synthesize that, it would be the commercial value and understanding culture or tapping into culture. I mean, did you start to see that was an opportunity for the taking?
Most definitely. You know, most of the companies, I'm not being rude here, but American companies generally come in with a product and try to force that product in. What we tried to do was actually go in. We generally partner with universities, a health organization, and understand the health needs of that country. Because actually every single country, Asia is a region, it's not a country, and every single country has quite a different need. So if you look at somewhere like Indonesia, it's a young population. It's often got 4 children per family. So that was an ideal market for a product like Pregnancy Breastfeeding Gold, because they're having lots of children. And then if you looked at somewhere like Thailand, that's an aging population. And that was where you have things like Lipronol, which is a green lip mussel. Every market, too, has different regulation. So unless you're going to make really pretty bland products, which we would never do, to be honest, because they don't have therapeutic value, then you have to tailor for each individual market as well. So you've got to be prepared to do that. But doing that means you get to learn the consumer. My personal view is if you make sure you've got some local people who understand your culture and they understand the culture you want to enter, that's the best way to do it.
Absolutely.
That's why students are good.
How did you go about prioritising? I often think about an Australian business or business person, they're seeing more on the news and in the public domain about opportunities in Asia and, more than just China. There's so much information available these days on all of these markets that have a growing middle class, rising affluence, interest in what we're doing. There are trade missions, prolifically rolling out across the region. How do businesses go about prioritising, or how did you go about prioritising which market was first?
Well, I think, to be really frank with you, 17 years ago, there weren't many companies in Australia really seeing Asia as a growth platform. They still saw the UK, America and New Zealand as safe places to invest their money and grow. And unfortunately, I think they still do. However, what was really important, Marcus was a big believer. That was the chairman, Marcus Blackmore. He was a big believer in Asia. And he was already in 5 countries, but it was very loss-making. And no one really believed in it other than the chairman. That's the problem. And so when I'd come along and said, hey, we need to refocus for Asia, I didn't really know how he was going to react, but he was massively supportive. But what was really evident, before you can go and do the big markets like China and Indonesia, you actually have to fix the markets you're in. You can't just think, hey, I'm in Asia and I'm just going to forget these ones. And, Hong Kong was terrible when Peter and I first started together. You have to go and fix that first because people do see what you do in different markets. And so the first thing was, let's get the 5 countries where we operate in today booming. And then let's start focusing. And some of those things were where they were a natural step on for regulation. So for Thailand, a natural step was Vietnam, for example. And that's really how we started to grow that strategy. if you operate in Malaysia, you have to do things to halal certification. Well, if you're making products for halal certification, then it's obvious you probably want to look at Indonesia as a market and see if those products can go across there. Singapore, for example, has a lot of big pharmacy groups which run in other countries too. So there are ways that you can use where you already were to take a platform. But of course, the big prize was China. And although, China really helped take our company really from a couple of $100 million to 3.3 billion in market cap, it wasn't a straight road, and there was lots of challenges on the journey.
We've opened the door there. Can you tell us about some of those challenges, perhaps even if you're open to sharing some of those war stories, about what was facing you and what did it take to work through those, around those, navigate those challenges?
I think it was about 2015 when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister and they just signed CHAFTA. And, everybody was so hopeful that it was all going to start to happen. And we had already, we in 2013 had started investing in China. We'd employed 100 people and we were all super excited. And at those days, to set up a WOFI, a wholly owned foreign entity, which is sort of a vehicle for you to have your own safe entity there, you had to put quite a bit of capital in. Might not sound much to many people listening, but it was $30 million. But when your chairman owns a quarter of the company, it always made me think that 7.5 of that is his.
Right.
And he's in the room next door. So it has a different feeling. We had just started to get going, and there had been a challenge between a baby formula from Danone and Fonterra, and they decided to close they basically banned any food or health product coming into China for a period of time while it was investigated. Now, you've just employed 100 people on the ground in Beijing and Shanghai. You've got 30 million of the company's money sitting in a bank account, and you have zero turnover happening. And this all happened, and it was quite interesting. A lot of the media, were, there you go, see, you didn't know what you were doing. They were very, very critical. And we had an AGM coming up, and Marcus said to me, this is going to be the hot topic, Christine. What do you think? And I said, well, I think you have to play the long game and not just pull out and say, oh, it's all too difficult. Yes, I don't know when it's going to end, but we have to show that we're committed. And a lot of other brands did pull out in that period of time. We didn't. And we carried on working with the Chinese government to get through any type of approval we needed to do. And it did take some time, and we were criticised quite heavily for that. But I'm pleased to say that our shareholders said, get on with it, Christine, we're right behind you. And of course, it proved to be absolutely the right thing to do, because when the regulations were opened up again, then that was our chance to shine.
In addition to what you've done as leading enterprises, I feel as though you've been one of Australia's longest standing advocates for deeper engagement with Asia, not just within the corporate sector, but more broadly. What's that journey been like for you, and do you feel the context around you has changed? Has it caught up in terms of some of those things you've been advocating for?
I think a lot has changed and a lot has improved, but I still feel we have a long way to go. My organisation probably employs 15,000 people or somewhere close to that. And 14,000 of those are frontline people. If you were to come with me today out to Tullamarine at the airport and come in our facilities and meet a lot of our frontline workers, you would see a lot of Asian people. And yet we still don't really probably have fair representation of women, but we definitely don't have the representation of our, citizens in our boardrooms. And I feel that we still haven't yet got to the place of recognising the contribution that these people make to our society. I still would like it that people who come from overseas, who bring such incredible skills and experiences, that we could recognise some of those. They come from the best universities in the world, and yet when they come to Australia, those qualifications aren't recognised, and yet we've got skill shortages. So I think we've still got some way to go, and I think paying respect still to those people. It worried me deeply when COVID was on. It was all too simple for people to blame, the Chinese for COVID. And I know, employing people through that period of time, a lot of Chinese people, it was a very sensitive time for them. But I'm also very hopeful. Post-COVID, our growth in our population, we have a lot more Indian people coming in, a lot more Chinese people coming in, Koreans coming in, and we're getting more and more diverse, and that means better food. So I am hopeful for the future, but I think we still have some way to go.
So what's the consequence of that? What price is Australia paying for some of those limiting beliefs we have, or underappreciation for some of the things you've spoken about?
This is a bit of a delicate one. So, and we're sitting in a university, and there was all the debate last year about, do the universities have too many international students? And I went to the university conference, and I overheard someone talking who wasn't from a university, who was saying, you should all be capped, and people should only get in who have this and do that, and it really disappointed me, to be honest, because I only went to university because the dean of the business school offered me free tuition, and the reason why I set up lots of businesses was because I had no grant. And if the university was forced into acting the way of the language which was being said earlier this year, I never would have had the chance to go. I wouldn't be here today. So I feel very passionate that that's the wrong approach. And I also feel that people forget, our international students who bring not just, they actually help subsidise for many Australian students to be able to afford to come here and develop the content, the university, this actually studio. They forget all of that. And the parents of, those students can easily send their children somewhere else. And it's the same with products. 30% of our exports go to China. 49% go to Southeast Asia and China. That's half of what we do. That's actually 22% of our GDP of our country. We'd have mass unemployment with that. And I just wish sometimes people would recognise the contribution that Asia has given Australia, and that it's really helped us avoid a lot of the financial crises that has happened in many other countries. And we are so rich that we have this amazing diaspora of these intelligent young people in our country on the doorstep of so many countries growing so fast, where we have so many things that could help them, but we could also learn from them. The acceleration of our dream to be, to address carbon emissions. It's a two-way street. And I just wish we recognised and said thank you a little bit more.
Well said. Are there things we could do to deepen that appreciation, or that perspective gap that might exist in terms of, and it's not that we don't need to reconcile things that are important to Australia's interests specifically, but then this massive contribution and opportunity, the contribution to prosperity. So all of these elements swirling and connecting. But is there more we could be doing, or what do you think it would take to just help with addressing that perspective gap?
This is not a political thing when I say this, but having a foreign minister who comes from Malaysia and speaks Chinese and is deeply respectful of the region, I think actually sets a really good tone. In fairness, Julie Bishop, who was from the Liberal Party, she was deeply respectful of Asia and very, very supportive. So it's not a political thing, but I think having people in these key roles recognizing the contribution from the region, I think is really important. And, I think we're seeing that now, and we've seen it previously. So I do think people lock up to who they see as the most highest level of power. And if they see those people acting respectfully, it's a pretty good role model. But if they see them acting pretty shabbily, in my opinion, then perhaps that's not the best example.
Okay. You were the chair of the Australian ASEAN Council. That would have, again, added to your the breadth of your meetings, the people that you would engage with. Do you have any interesting memories from your time going out to the region, particularly engaging with ASEAN? Any insights and lessons learned?
I've got lots. I made some fantastic friends who I'm still very in touch with, and great friends today from the region. Our council was just incredible. I absolutely loved it, and I think all of us did. We were a really strong, tight-knit. But I'll share with you one experience. I think it was 70 years of diplomatic relations with the Philippines. And Julie Bishop was the Foreign Minister at the time, and she called me and said, look, I can't go, and there's a vote on in Parliament. I wondered whether you could go with some of your colleagues from the council and recognise this really important time in the Philippines, and you'll get to meet Duterte. And I said, oh, sure, yes, of course I would. Now, my impression of Duterte was a man who radically shot people under the disguise of, that they might be pushing drugs. And that was kind of picked up from the media. And I got there, and the night I was getting ready to go to this, big gala dinner, with all the dignitaries. I was in my room, and a lady came to the room to change something, and she said to me, excuse me, you're the lady going to meet our president tonight, aren't you? So I said, yes. And she said, how do you feel? And I said, well, I'm a little bit nervous, actually. And she said, he's an amazing man. I said, really? She said, you don't understand. As a mother, there was nothing I was more worried about than my children leaving home and actually coming back being involved in drugs. And he's cleaned that up. And I come from a village, and she said he brought, dentists out to her village and medical support that they'd never seen before. And it was a big lesson to me to be careful not to read your media, to take an impression of something before you get there. Maybe listen to the local people and to take a balanced perspective between those two.
So how do you navigate that? And I'm thinking about listeners and viewers for this conversation about, it's important to be respectful of cultures and appreciate differences, and diversity is a strength. At the same time, there might be aspects of that are confronting, or you might even just flat out disagree with. How do you reconcile that? How do you know where you sit on the spectrum when you're going out to the region, being respectful to different practices, but at the same time, and this is a whole range of things, saying, well, hey, there's some stops here as well. There's some things I don't agree with.
Well, I mean, first of all, Australia has brilliant embassies right across Asia. And there's also an organisation called Austrade who will help people get that in-depth look and, help them understand what those perspectives are. And I think that's actually, quite important. When I was at secondary school, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi was a bit of a merging global figure. Here was this little lady with a flower in her head, prepared to go to prison to fight for her people. I thought she was incredible. And I became, she was part of my obsession with Asia. And, I read all the letters she wrote and the books she wrote. I thought, when I grow up, I want to be Aung San Suu Kyi. Clearly, I didn't quite make that. But when, in 2018, Australia hosted the ASEAN leaders meeting. It was the first time ever we had 10 heads of state. In fact, actually, Duterte didn't come. His foreign minister came. But every other heads of state came. And Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister at the time, and he knew that I liked Aung San Suu Kyi. That he knew the story. And him and Julie Bishop organised for me to have a one-on-one with her. And I was so excited. But of course, there was the Rohingya issue with the people. And we were talking, and I said to her, please forgive me, but could you share with me your perspective on it? And she just looked at me and said, they're not our people. And I realised then that I had perhaps over-romanticised this lady in my mind all these years. And that was a crossing of the line for me, because here was these people of a different faith who were living on the border of her country, who were being pushed into the most squalid conditions and dying, and it didn't feel right. So I think you do have to make your own judgments, but at the same time you have to be respectful. It is their country, it's not my country. So I remain deeply respectful of what she's done for her country, but probably don't have her quite on such a high pedestal as I did as a 14-year-old.
You've had the vantage point of having held different roles. We spoke earlier about you being an entrepreneur. You've gone on to lead very large corporate organisations. You've worked in partnership with government. Does that shape your perspective now that you've had these different vantage points, and thinking about that story you've just shared as well, understanding the counterparts you engage with as well? Do you think you look at people with different lenses because of the different experiences you've had?
I've had a lot of different experiences, and a lot of really good ones, and a few bit more challenging. But of course they do. You know, sometimes your deepest scars are the reminder of your strength, because people who say nothing goes wrong, please don't employ them because it's likely to go wrong on your patch. And I think for me, it's not whether it goes wrong or not, it's how you get up again and how you conduct yourself. So, yes, it does. And I think that is a big learning from the region too. They are very, very diplomatic people. I mean, look at Japan. It's an amazing country of grace. And no, I think most definitely. You know, when I left Blackmores and before I joined Australia Post, you know, Blackmores was every day of my life. Like, it was 9 years, lived and breathed it. And I thought, wow, how am I going to get this thing out of my blood before I go to start this new job with very different challenges? And there was a few different things I did, but one of them was Peter Osborne, who was my managing director for Asia and had worked for Austrade and for the Australian government for, I think, around 25 years. He was very committed to helping this Buddhist monk and supporting this Buddhist temple in Bhutan up the side of a mountain where there was no heating, no hot water. And I agreed to go with him and to spend some time at the temple because I thought it would be like cleaning the whiteboard of my mind. And it was. But, you know, there was one day when I had a challenge in my mind and I was speaking to the Buddhist monk who was the head of the temple, and I was talking to him about it. And I said, well, what would you do? And he just looked at me and he said, open your mind, think bigger. And I just thought, what? And it was just this really simple thing. But he was basically saying to me, you have got the solution. You are just closing your mind to this part here. Relax, think bigger. So every time at work now, when people come to me and say, oh, look at all of this, I say, stop, pause, think bigger.
Christine, there's some wonderful wisdom in there. And in so many of the stories you've shared, professional but also personal, in terms of your corporate career, your professional journey, and of course your relationship with Asia. I think there's a lot of business people, professionals in Australia still trying to figure out what their engagement with Asia should be. One country, one market, the whole region as a whole. Do you have any advice for business people who might be trying to figure out their relationship with Asia?
The first thing I would say is, you know, this is a fabulous country, and there are some massive changes happening in our place right now. And one I just want to give you an example of is the growth of inbound e-commerce from China at the moment. Shop like a billionaire with Temu. And, I met with a retailer recently who was like, oh, we've got to put tariffs in. We've got to stop this. And I said, absolutely not. What we've got to do together is learn how we ride this wave, how we use that volume to underpin growth in our own country. So what I would, really love to say to anyone who is listening is, we're just 27 million people. There are 2 billion people who actually love us just up the road. What an amazing marketplace with all sorts of age groups, needs. They need our help in town planning. You've got places like Indonesia going through massive change and growth, healthcare, aging populations in Japan and Thailand. We've just got so much to give and so much to learn both ways. Don't park yourself in the village of just Australia and open yourself up. And there's this amazing market there that you can help your business grow, even in tougher times here in Australia. And we have this unique thing, which is 30% of us were born overseas, 49% of us were either born overseas or our parents were. So we're so rich in different cultures here. Tap in, probably just to the person sitting next to you. And don't be afraid. Now, I'm not for 1 minute saying it's plain sailing, because I know personally that when you try and borrow money to expand in Asia, still a lot of the banks can see it as higher risk. And so they charge you a higher rate of interest. But sometimes that's all not a bad thing, because it makes you really stop and think, have I got the right strategy? But don't be afraid. And there's amazing organisations to help you on the journey. You can even get grants actually from the government to help you, do research in those markets. But I was in New Zealand last week, and it's a fabulous country, but it still depresses me that we're still investing more money in New Zealand than like Indonesia, and they've got, 5.5 million people, and there's 250 million people, people up here, and such a growing economy. I would love it if we could have Bahasa taught in our schools again. Indonesia is so close to us. We'll keep campaigning, Leigh, you and me together.
It's a promise. Christine, that's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on The Giants Next Door.
Pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to The Giants Next Door. If this conversation sparked something in you, be sure to follow the show and share it with others who are thinking seriously about Australia's future in Asia. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.